My name is Elena Ward, and 3 years ago I took a night clerk job at a roadside inn outside Cedar Falls. The place was tiny, old, and usually half empty during the week. Most nights, I sat alone behind the front desk, listening to the vending machines hum while trucks rolled past on the highway outside. I worked from late evening until sunrise. By midnight, the lobby usually looked abandoned. The automatic doors locked after 11, so guests had to press a buzzer before I let them in. One rainy Thursday, a man arrived just after the storm rolled in. He stood outside the glass doors wearing a dark jacket and carrying a faded canvas bag. Something about the way he stared through the glass before pressing the buzzer made me hesitate. Still, I unlocked the door and let him in. He walked slowly to the counter and asked if we had a room available for one night. His voice sounded calm, almost rehearsed. I told him we had several rooms open and quoted the price. He smiled without showing his teeth and handed me a bank card. I swiped it, heard the usual beep, and handed him a key card for room 216. Instead of leaving immediately, he kept staring at me with an unreadable expression. It lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. Then he turned and walked toward the hallway leading to the elevator. At first, I ignored the strange feeling in my stomach. People passing through small towns late at night were often tired or awkward. I went back into the office behind the desk, opened my phone, and tried to relax. A while later, I looked up and saw the same man sitting in the lounge area beside the dead television. The screen was black, but he stared at it as if he were watching something only he could see. Half an hour passed. He never checked his phone, never moved, never looked away from the blank screen. I finally walked into the lobby to grab a bottle of water from the vending machine. As soon as I stepped away from the desk, I felt his eyes follow me. I never looked directly at him, but I could feel him watching every step I took until I returned behind the counter. That was when the uneasiness started becoming fear. I opened the reservation system to double-check the nightly occupancy list. Room 216 appeared vacant. I frowned and refreshed the screen, assuming the system lagged. The room still showed empty. I searched the recent check-ins. Nothing. No payment, no guest profile, no digital record that the man had ever rented a room. My chest tightened. I checked the payment log next, expecting to see a pending charge. There was nothing there either. Somehow the transaction I remembered processing had completely disappeared. I even checked the electronic lock report for room 216. The door had never been opened. The man had never gone upstairs. I slowly lifted my eyes toward the lounge area. He was still there, sitting perfectly still beneath the dim lamp beside the television, watching. I picked up the desk phone and called room 216 anyway. The line rang again and again before disconnecting. No answer, no movement upstairs, nothing. I sat frozen behind the counter trying to decide whether I was overreacting. Maybe the software had glitched. Maybe I had accidentally canceled the booking without noticing. But deep down, I already knew something was wrong. 15 minutes later, I forced myself to approach him. "Sir, is everything okay tonight?" I asked. He slowly turned his head toward me. His expression stayed completely blank. "Just resting," he said quietly. "Couldn't sleep." Then he looked back toward the dead television. The entire conversation lasted only seconds, yet my hands shook when I returned to the desk. I called my manager and explained the situation. She sounded exhausted and told me to keep an eye on him unless he became aggressive. The answer made me feel even more alone. Not long after the call ended, the man disappeared from the lounge. I looked around the lobby and couldn't see him anywhere. Then I noticed him standing near the hallway beside the public restrooms where the lights barely reached. He stood completely still in the shadows. No phone, no luggage, just staring toward the desk. I pretended to type on the computer while secretly watching him through the reflection in the monitor. After several minutes, he casually walked back to the lounge and sat down again as if nothing strange had happened. That was the moment I realized the fear in my stomach wasn't paranoia. Something was seriously wrong. I opened the security cameras and started tracking his movements through the building. Every hallway camera caught him wandering slowly from floor to floor. Sometimes he stopped outside occupied guest rooms for several minutes at a time. Other times he stood motionless near stairwells where the cameras barely captured his face. Watching him move through the motel felt less like observing a guest and more like tracking a predator searching for an opening. The longer the night dragged on, the worse my imagination became. At one point, he disappeared into the emergency stairwell for nearly 10 minutes. When he came back out, his jacket looked damp, like he had been outside in the rain. But none of the exit alarms had sounded. I had no idea where he had gone, or how long he had really been wandering around the property before I noticed. I kept telling myself there had to be a rational explanation. But every instinct in my body screamed otherwise. Eventually, he started drifting closer to the front desk. First, he stood near the ice machine, pretending to read a brochure. Then he wandered beside the vending machines without buying anything. Finally, he stopped less than 20 feet from the counter and simply stared at me. He barely blinked. I tried focusing on paperwork, but my breathing kept turning shallow every time I looked up and found him still watching. A little while later, another guest buzzed the front doors and stepped inside carrying fast food containers. The man instantly shifted his attention toward the guest and followed him with his eyes all the way to the elevator. The intensity of that stare made my skin crawl. The guest disappeared upstairs. The stranger slowly smiled. That was enough for me. I called the non-emergency police line and explained everything from the missing reservation to the suspicious wandering through the halls. The dispatcher promised to send officers to check the property. While I waited, the man vanished again. I pulled up the hallway cameras and found him standing outside room 108. He wasn't knocking. He wasn't using a key card. He was simply standing there facing the door as though he were listening to the people inside. I immediately called emergency services. My voice shook so badly the dispatcher had to ask me twice for the motel address. I kept watching the monitor while she stayed on the line. The man remained outside the room for nearly 3 full minutes before turning around and casually walking back toward the lobby. When he returned, he approached the desk for the first time in over an hour. He leaned forward slightly. "Any food around here?" he asked softly. His voice sounded almost gentle, which somehow terrified me even more. I pointed toward the vending machines and told him that was all we had overnight. He smiled again. "Long shift for you," he whispered. Then he walked away. I remember staring at the clock behind the desk and wondering whether the police were ever going to arrive. Every second felt stretched thin. Every sound made me jump. Finally, headlights flashed through the rain outside the glass doors. 2 patrol cars pulled into the parking lot. Relief hit me so hard, my knees almost gave out. I buzzed the officers inside and pointed toward the lounge. The man was sitting there again like he had never moved. The officers approached him calmly and started asking questions. I couldn't hear most of the conversation from behind the desk, but I saw the moment their expressions changed. One officer asked for identification while the other quietly moved closer to block the exit. The stranger stayed calm the entire time. No panic, no anger, just that same empty expression. After several minutes, the officers escorted him outside. One of them returned a short while later and explained what they had discovered. The bank card he gave me belonged to someone else. The identification he carried was fake, and according to dispatch, he had already been questioned at 2 different motels earlier that week for trespassing. The officer asked whether anything else seemed unusual during the encounter. I almost laughed at the question. Everything about him had been unusual. The police searched the property before leaving. They found muddy footprints near a side maintenance entrance and pry marks around the lock leading to the back hallway. One officer quietly admitted that the man may have been trying to learn the layout of the motel before attempting something worse later in the night. That sentence stayed with me long after sunrise, because suddenly all those silent stares and endless wandering no longer felt random. They felt planned. I wish the story ended there. For weeks after that night, I barely slept. Every creak in my apartment sounded like footsteps outside my door. Every unknown car driving slowly past my building made my pulse spike. My manager installed brighter lights around the motel and upgraded several security cameras, but the place never felt safe again. Then, almost 2 months later, he came back. It happened during another overnight shift near the end of autumn. Business was slow and freezing rain hammered the windows hard enough to drown out the traffic from the highway. Around midnight, the front buzzer sounded. I looked at the security monitor expecting another traveler. Instead, I saw a woman standing outside holding an umbrella. She looked exhausted and asked if we had any vacancies. Her car had supposedly broken down nearby and she needed somewhere to stay until morning. I unlocked the door and checked her in without hesitation. Nothing about her seemed strange. But while printing her paperwork, I noticed movement behind her through the glass entrance. A figure standing across the parking lot, watching. The hood of his jacket covered most of his face, but I recognized the posture instantly. My blood turned cold. The woman turned around as if she sensed something too, but the figure stepped back into the darkness before she could get a good look. I quickly handed her the room key and told her to lock the door immediately once she got upstairs. She gave me a confused smile and carried her bags toward the elevator. The moment she disappeared from sight, I locked the front entrance and called the police. While waiting for officers, I kept checking the cameras. At first, the parking lot looked empty. Then, one of the exterior cameras flickered. When the image returned, he was standing beside the side entrance only a few feet from the building. Rainwater dripped from the hood of his jacket. He stared directly into the camera. I backed away from the monitor so fast, the office chair tipped over behind me. The side entrance suddenly rattled. Once. Then again. Harder. I heard metal scraping against metal like someone testing the lock. The maintenance hallway lights flickered. I called out that police were already on the way even though I wasn't sure he could hear me. The rattling stopped. Silence filled the building. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then the emergency exit alarm exploded through the motel. He had forced another door open somewhere inside. I pulled up the hallway cameras with shaking hands and spotted him moving quickly through the first-floor corridor. Unlike before, he no longer wandered slowly. This time, he moved with purpose. Room 112. That was where the stranded woman was staying. I grabbed the desk phone and called the room immediately. She answered after the second ring, sounding half asleep. "Lock your bathroom door and stay quiet," I whispered. "Someone is inside the building." The confusion in her voice vanished instantly. I watched the hallway camera while speaking to her. The man stopped outside her room and slowly reached toward the doorknob. My heart slammed against my ribs. The knob didn't turn. The deadbolt held. He stood there motionless for several terrifying seconds before tilting his head toward the camera like he somehow knew I was watching. Then he smiled. Not a normal smile. A patient one. The kind of smile that said he believed time was on his side. Suddenly, police sirens echoed outside. The man sprinted down the hallway and disappeared through the emergency exit. Officers flooded the motel moments later and searched the surrounding woods for nearly an hour. They never found him. But they did find something else. Behind the motel near the tree line sat an old van partially hidden beneath branches and tarps. Inside were maps, motel brochures, stolen license plates, bottled water, duct tape, gloves, and photographs of different roadside businesses across the county, including my motel, including me. One photo showed me unlocking the front doors for a guest weeks earlier. Another captured me taking trash to the dumpster behind the building. The police believed he had been watching the motel long before the first encounter ever happened. And according to investigators, I wasn't the only night worker he had followed. Detectives interviewed me for hours after the van was discovered. They asked about every detail I could remember from both encounters. The way he spoke, the way he moved, the exact questions he asked. By sunrise, my throat felt raw and my hands still wouldn't stop trembling. The investigation uncovered pieces of a pattern that terrified me even more than the man himself. Several overnight employees from nearby towns had reported strange incidents during the previous year. Some noticed unfamiliar cars parked outside their workplaces for hours. Others described customers who lingered without reason, asked personal questions, or somehow knew details they shouldn't have known. One motel clerk claimed someone repeatedly tested side entrances during overnight shifts before disappearing whenever police were called. None of those reports had seemed connected at first, until investigators found the van. The photographs inside were organized by location: gas stations, motels, small diners open late at night. Every picture focused on employees working alone, mostly women. The realization made me physically sick. Police eventually identified the man using fingerprints left inside the abandoned van. His real name was Victor Hale. He had prior arrests in multiple states for stalking, identity theft, burglary, and unlawful entry. Authorities suspected he traveled constantly, targeting isolated businesses where exhausted workers handled overnight shifts alone. Despite the evidence, they still couldn't find him. He disappeared before a warrant could be issued. For months afterward, I lived in a constant state of tension. I changed apartments. I stopped working overnight jobs. I memorized the license plates of cars that parked near my building. Sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night convinced someone was standing outside my bedroom window. Most of the time there was nothing there. But fear changes the way your mind works, especially fear that once proved itself real. Nearly a year passed before I finally started feeling normal again. Then, one evening, I came home from grocery shopping and found an envelope taped to my apartment door. No stamp, no return address, just my name written neatly across the front. My stomach dropped before I even touched it. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the front desk of the motel. The picture had clearly been taken from outside through the lobby windows during one of my old shifts. I stood behind the counter looking down at paperwork, completely unaware someone was watching me. Across the bottom of the photo, someone had written a short sentence in black ink. "You always looked safest when you thought you were alone." I immediately called the police. Officers searched the apartment complex and reviewed nearby security footage, but whoever left the envelope avoided every camera. Detectives believed the photograph was old, possibly taken before the abandoned van was discovered, yet that explanation didn't make me feel any safer, because it meant he had kept the picture all that time, waiting. After that, I left Cedar Falls entirely. I moved across the state, changed jobs again, and tried to disappear into a larger city where strangers blended together. Friends told me I should feel relieved because investigators believed Victor Hale had probably moved on to another region. But that was exactly what frightened me. People like him never really stop. They simply move. Even now, I still catch myself studying faces in grocery stores or checking reflections in parking lot windows. If footsteps echo behind me at night, I instinctively speed up. Sometimes when my phone rings from an unknown number, I let it vibrate until voicemail picks up because part of me still fears hearing that soft, calm voice again. I've replayed those nights in my head more times than I can count. The silent staring, the fake smile, the endless wandering through empty hallways. And the worst part is knowing how close I came to dismissing every warning sign because I didn't want to seem paranoid. People always imagine danger arrives loudly. But sometimes it enters quietly. Sometimes it smiles politely. Sometimes it sits in a dim motel lounge pretending to watch a television that was never even turned on. And sometimes, long after it disappears, you still feel its eyes following you through the dark.